Welcome to the Family Office Insider Podcast. My name is Jason Nagel, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the use of a child's trust for estate planning and how a child's trust can be used to protect any inheritance that's left behind for your children. And so let's talk about the traditional model of planning with respect to giving assets to your children on your death. Often what we find is parents will draft their estate documents, their wills, such that it says that on their death, any assets that get left to their children get held in trust for the benefit of their children until their children reach the age of 25, at which time all the assets are distributed out to their children. Or it could be more of a staggered distribution, such that half the assets go at the age of 30 and the other assets go to the children at the age of 35, for example. And so the concern there is that those assets on your death, those assets would be held in trust for the benefit of your children until they hit those ages. Let's just say it's a staggered distribution where they get half at 30 and the other half at 35. There would be a trustee that's appointed to manage these assets for the benefit of your children until those times. Now, at the age of 30, your children would be entitled to half of the distribution, which means that money now becomes theirs. They're able to do whatever they want with those funds. And then at the age of 35, the other half becomes theirs. And so if they were to be sued, if they were to have a failed relationship, if they were to go and pass away, unfortunately, that could make it so those assets end up in the hands of somebody else. Right. And so let's look at each of those. So if they were to become sued, because those assets are owned by your child directly, well, then they are open to the creditors. They could also be open to spousal division if they subsequently get separated or divorced from their spouse, if they commingled those assets with their other family assets. And on their death, because they own those assets directly, it would be distributed according to the terms of their will, which likely would state that it would go to their spouse as a beneficiary through their will. Now, if you wanted that to stay in the family lines, for example, any inheritance that you gift to your child, if you wanted to have that stay with your grandchildren on your child's death, well, that's where a child's trust could come into play. A child's trust is simply a trust provision that's drafted within your estate document that states that any assets you own on your death would be held in trust, similar to before, for the benefit of your children. However, there is no distribution date set. So there is a trustee that's appointed to manage these assets for the benefit of your children throughout their lifetime. Your child could become a co-trustee, for example, at the age of 25. And they could also become the sole trustee, for example, at the age of 30, which means they are now the one who's in charge of managing the trust assets for the benefit of themselves. So if they wanted to, they could completely dismantle the trust and wind it down and take all the assets out. However, being prudent, they would probably leave it within the trust. That way, it's not going to be divided according to the terms of their will. It's not open to their creditors if they were to have a creditor issue. However, they still have access to all the funds for whatever they want. So what would happen on their death? Well, the assets would remain in trust. However, the trust provision would state that there is a residual beneficiary. The residual beneficiary likely would be their children. So on their death, your child's will would account for whatever assets that they own personally. However, whatever assets that they held within this child's trust would remain in the trust, and the residual beneficiaries would be their children, and they would now have access to those funds. Now, if there is no children, then you could state that it would go then to their sibling, right? And so that is how you can keep the assets within the family line. So a child's trust is a very effective planning tool. We use it quite often for higher net worth families that really want to make sure that they can protect their assets on their death. Obviously, there's some other concerns on that I'm not going to get into today, but a child's trust can be a very effective planning tool rather than just going with the traditional model of dividing the assets out to your children equally on your death at certain ages. I hope that you found this helpful. If you did, feel free to follow us, feel free to like the video, and check us out at 360wealth.ca to see if perhaps we can help you. Thank you. Take care.